At 7:32 a.m. on February 10, 1942, Lieutenant Commander John Thach watched 6 Japanese Zeros dive straight at his 4 Wildcats over Wake Island. He knew his squad had maybe a minute and a half before everything went dark. Thach was 37, with 214 hours in a Wildcat and 0 kills against Zeros, which was normal because nobody was winning those fights. The Japanese had launched 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters to wipe out American patrols that morning. The Wildcat couldn't keep up. The Zero climbed faster, turned sharper, and could dance around any American fighter at any altitude. Everyone knew it, Japanese and American. The math was brutal. A Zero could outturn a Wildcat in just 14 seconds. 14 seconds to get on your tail. 14 seconds to line up the guns. 14 seconds to end you. By February, the Pacific Fleet had already lost 43 Wildcats in one-on-one dogfights with Zeros. 43 pilots who made the same choice. Try to turn with a Zero, get outturned, get shot down. Command kept repeating the same rule: avoid turning fights, run if you can. But running meant leaving your own guys behind to get shredded. Thach led Fighting Squadron 3, 4 men who trusted him to keep them alive, and he had nothing that could beat the Zero. No better climb, no tighter turn, just more dead pilots he couldn't afford to lose. 3 days earlier, he'd been sitting in his quarters at Naval Air Station San Diego, staring at a pack of matches his wife had sent. 20 wooden matches in a flimsy cardboard box. The Zero problem had been eating at him for weeks. How do you beat an enemy who turns tighter, flies faster, and has 2 years of combat experience? Thach picked up 2 matches and held them side by side. Then he moved them in opposite directions, weaving them past each other, crossing, reversing, crossing again, never separating. And suddenly something clicked. What if Wildcats didn't fight alone? What if 2 pilots flew in a constant weave? If a Zero got behind one Wildcat, that pilot would turn toward his wingman. The wingman would turn toward him. They'd cross, and the Zero chasing the first Wildcat would fly right into the second Wildcat's guns. It sounded insane. It broke every Navy doctrine. Fighter pilots were trained to split and fight one-on-one. That's how it had been since 1918. But Thach couldn't shake the image of those matches crossing, or the weight of 43 funerals. He called in his wingman, Lieutenant Edward O'Hare, that night, showed him the matches, explained the weave. O'Hare studied the setup for half a minute, then looked up and asked one thing: "When do we test it?" Now, 4 days later, Thach was about to find out whether his matchstick idea would save lives or get 4 pilots killed. The 6 Zeros were already 200 yards out and closing. His hand moved to the radio. Time to try something no one had ever used in real combat. "Weave on my mark." Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett sat 800 feet off Thach's right wing. Another 1,000 feet beyond Bassett were ensigns Daniel Sheedy and Edgar Colson. 4 Wildcats in a stretched line. 6 Zeros dropping from 11,000 feet.
Doctrine said, "Split up, fight alone." Thach ignored it. "Bassett on me, weave pattern, execute." Bassett turned toward him. Thach turned toward Bassett. 2 Wildcats slicing directly at each other while the Zeros plunged to 8,000 feet. To the Japanese pilots, it probably looked like panic, like the Americans were about to ram each other out of fear. But at 400 yards, both Wildcats snapped into a hard bank. Thach pulled left, Bassett pulled right. They crossed with about 200 feet of space, then kept turning back toward each other again, forming a tight figure-8 weave exactly like those matchsticks on Thach's desk. The lead Zero picked Bassett and locked onto his tail, closing to 600 yards. Classic Zero tactic. Get close, use the insane turning ability, rip the target apart with 20mm cannon fire. And the Zero pilot was expecting the usual response. the American trying to turn with him. But Bassett didn't turn away. And that's when everything changed. The Zero pilot probably thought he had an easy kill lined up. Bassett wasn't running. He turned straight toward Thach, pulling the Zero with him. 400 yards, 300. The Zero had Bassett perfectly centered and was literally seconds from firing. Then Thach came slicing through the weave from the opposite side. Suddenly the Zero pilot was staring down a whole new problem. He was locked onto Bassett, but Bassett was flying straight toward another Wildcat, and that Wildcat already had its guns aimed at him. At 300 yards, Thach opened fire. 6.50 cal machine guns unleashed almost 70 rounds a second. The Zero pilot had one choice: break off or fly directly into a storm of bullets. He broke off, yanked right, climbed, and the other 5 Zeros scattered. For the first time in the Pacific, Zeros were running from Wildcats. Sheedy and Coulson had watched the weave work. Now it was their turn. Sheedy turned toward Coulson. Coulson turned toward Sheedy. Another perfect figure-8 weave. A Zero locked onto Coulson's tail and closed to 400 yards, right before Sheedy came cutting through the weave, forcing the Zero pilot to flinch, pull up, and disengage. The whole dogfight lasted 6 minutes. 6 Zeros against 4 Wildcats. Normally that story ends with 4 destroyed American planes. But when the Zeros finally climbed away and headed northwest, all 4 Wildcats were still in the air. Thach checked fuel, checked his men. Not a single hit, not a single loss. The weave worked. 40 minutes later, he landed at Ford Island with his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the hit of adrenaline and the realization that American pilots didn't have to get slaughtered every time they met Zeros. But Fighter Command wasn't sold. Thach filed his combat report that same afternoon, described the weave, detailed how it worked, and recommended immediate adoption. 3 days later, he got the reply. Interesting tactic. Needs further testing. Not approved. Thach just stared at the paper. 43 pilots had died in February alone, and Command wanted more testing. Meanwhile, Japan was preparing something massive.
In just 68 days, Thach would be flying over a place called Midway, facing 50 Zeros with only 8 Wildcats. Between February and June 1942, he trained Fighting Squadron 3 non-stop. Morning flights, afternoon drills, night formations. Whenever the moon was bright enough, they practiced the weave until the pattern felt instinctive. Turn toward your wingman, cross. Turn back, cross again. Simple on paper, brutal at 300 miles per hour while someone's trying to kill you. The Navy still hadn't officially approved the tactic, but Thach wasn't waiting. He taught it to any pilot willing to listen. He used matchsticks, chalkboards, geometry, anything to make them understand. If a Zero locked on your tail, you turn toward your wingman. The Zero must either follow you into your wingman's guns or break off. Either way, you live. Some pilots got it instantly. Others thought Thach had lost his mind. One squadron commander even told him the weave violated basic air combat rules. You don't fly toward another plane in a dogfight. You'll collide, you'll panic, you'll die. But Thach kept teaching because the body count kept rising. By May, the Pacific Fleet had lost 91 Wildcats to Zeros, 91 funerals, 91 letters home, and Command was still giving the same advice: avoid battle, run if outnumbered. Basically, accept defeat. Then naval intelligence cracked Japanese radio traffic. Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor decrypted the messages. Japan was preparing a huge strike on Midway. 4 carriers, 270 aircraft, the largest carrier operation Japan had ever launched. The attack was set for June 4, 1942. Admiral Chester Nimitz scrambled every available American carrier to Pearl Harbor. He had 3, Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. Japan had 4, plus more pilots, more experience, better planes.
The math was terrifying. The Americans would be outnumbered, outmatched, and Midway's runway would be a smoking crater in the first half hour of the attack. On May 26th, Fighting Squadron 3 received deployment orders. Report to USS Yorktown. Prepare for carrier operations. Thach read the orders and knew exactly what it meant. His squadron would be the shield over Yorktown, intercepting bombers, fighting Zeros, maybe dying in the process. That evening, he gathered his pilots. 7 pilots, 7 Wildcats, 7 lives hanging on a maneuver the Navy still hadn't officially accepted. Thach laid out the matchsticks again, walked them through the weave again, and then dropped the truth. Japan was bringing 50 Zeros to Midway, maybe more, and they'd have only 8 Wildcats, maybe fewer if Enterprise or Hornet lost fighters before the battle. The only shot at surviving? The weave. The only way to protect Yorktown? The weave. The only way to win? The weave. One pilot finally said what everyone else was thinking. What if it doesn't work? What if they weave and the Zeros just shoot them anyway? Thach didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't have a perfect answer. He just showed them the matchsticks again. 2 tiny sticks, crossing, covering each other, surviving together. Something a lone fighter could never do. On May 30th, Yorktown sailed from Pearl Harbor. 4 days to reach Midway. 4 days to prepare for a battle that would decide the future of the Pacific. 4 days to hope that a matchstick trick would save their lives when 50 Zeros came screaming out of the clouds.
Because on June 4th at 0930 hours, Thach would look up and see something no American pilot had ever faced. A sky so filled with Japanese fighters it looked almost black. June 4, 1942, 0930 hours. Thach was at 14,000 feet above Yorktown when the first Japanese attack wave appeared, 18 Aichi dive bombers with 12 Zeros escorting them. Not the 50 they feared, but 12 Zeros was still 3-to-1 odds against his 4-plane section. The Zeros stayed high at 15,000 feet, classic Japanese doctrine. Take altitude, dive on the Americans, use speed and agility to own the fight. Thach counted the enemy, counted his own. 4 Wildcats, 12 Zeros. He keyed the radio. Weave pattern, stand by for my mark. Bassett was 600 feet to his right. 2 more Wildcats sat farther back. The Zeros peeled off and committed, 3 diving toward Thach, 4 toward Bassett, the rest angling for Yorktown. Thach called it. Mark! Execute! He swung hard toward Bassett. Bassett swung toward him. They crossed at 12,000 feet, and the 3 Zeros chasing Thach suddenly saw their target flying straight into another Wildcat with guns already pointed at them. The lead Zero hesitated just 2 seconds, but 2 seconds at combat speed is almost 400 yards. Thach cut through the weave and fired. .50 cal rounds tore into the Zero's engine. It rolled left, coughing black smoke as it spiraled down, Thach's first kill. But the other 2 Zeros didn't fall for the same trap. They'd seen the weave. They adjusted. One climbed high, one dropped low. They split the angles to force Thach to choose which one to fight. Thach chased the high one into a climbing turn. Bassett took the low one. For 6 seconds, the weave shattered, both Wildcats fighting alone, exactly what Thach had spent months trying to prevent. The high Zero fired first. 20mm shells marched up Thach's left wing. 2 punched through the root, 1 ripped through the canopy, just 3 inches from his head. He felt the shock, felt metal pepper his flight suit, but he kept turning. Then Bassett's voice crackled through the radio. I'm hit! Repeat, I'm hit! Thach looked left. Bassett's Wildcat streamed white coolant smoke, maybe radiators, maybe engine failure, and the low Zero was still chewing up his tail. Thach didn't hesitate. He dumped his turn and dove to save Bassett.
The weave pattern was broken, but the core principle still held. Put yourself between your wingman and the threat. Thach dropped behind the low zero from the 7 o'clock high position. 600 yards, 500 yards, 400 yards. He fired. The zero erupted, pieces of wing and fuselage tumbling away in the slipstream. Bassett's Wildcat shuddered, losing altitude. "Engines overheating. I'm heading back to Yorktown." "Go," Thach said. He ordered the other 2 Wildcats to escort him.
That left Thach alone at 11,000 feet, with 10 Zeros still hunting. The Weave only worked with a wingman. Alone, Thach was just another Wildcat pilot trying to survive. He turned toward Yorktown and began descending. 3 Zeros spotted him instantly and broke off to intercept. Thach scanned for friendlies, saw 4 Wildcats from another squadron 3 miles east. Too far. The Zeros were already closing. He had no wingman, no weave, no real escape, and running meant dragging the Zeros directly toward Yorktown, exposing the carrier he was supposed to shield. So he keyed the radio and sent a message that sounded way too much like a goodbye. "Engaging 3 Zeros solo. If the weave works, you'll see proof. If it doesn't, tell my wife I love her." Thach swung his Wildcat toward 3 Zeros, ready to find out if his matchstick trick could actually save one pilot flying solo. He was at 9,000 feet when the Zeros got close enough to fire. No wingman, no backup. Just 4 months of studying the weave and breaking it down to pure geometry. And that's when it clicked for him. The weave wasn't about 2 planes. It was about 2 positions in the sky. He snapped into a hard right turn, then instantly flipped left. No smooth arcs, nothing predictable, just sharp, jarring angles. The lead Zero dove into the right turn after him, but Thach was already whipping back left. The Zero had to correct. Pull harder, burn more energy. Thach repeated it. Right turn, instant left. Every time the Zero chased right, Thach jumped left. The Japanese pilot was always a moment late, always adjusting, always losing energy. After 40 seconds of these brutal reversals, the Zero had bled off everything: altitude, speed, advantage. Now he was level with Thach. Same altitude, same energy. No edge left. The Zero peeled away and climbed out. The other 2 followed. Thach had just proved the point. The weave principle worked even with 1 plane. Force constant reactions. Keep the enemy guessing. Make them waste their energy. Make them give up. He landed on Yorktown 20 minutes later. Bassett had already made it back, his Wildcat patched with 4 bullet holes, but still flying. The rest of Fighting Squadron 3 gathered in the ready room. They'd all seen Thach fight off 3 Zeros alone. The story spread fast. By that afternoon, pilots across the fleet were talking about Thach's solo weave. Enterprise and Hornet crews pulled him aside for explanations. He broke out the matchsticks again, drew up diagrams, showed exactly how the reversals worked. Pilots tried it that night. Pair flights circled over the task force, practicing the timing of the weave. By June 5th, 18 Wildcat pilots could run the pattern smoothly. By June 6th, 32 could. The weave was spreading through the fleet faster than any official tactic ever had. Japanese radio intercepts started picking it up, references to new American maneuvers, coordinated pair flying, unpredictable moves, and Wildcats that just wouldn't die. One intercepted Japanese message said, "American Wildcat pilots have changed their methods. Expect increased resistance." On June 10th, Fighting Squadron 3 flew cap over a convoy near Midway. 8 Wildcats, 4 pairs. 14 Zeros attacked. Thach called the weave. All pairs locked in.
The Zeros tried everything: their usual isolation tactics, their tight turns, their attempts to pick off lone Wildcats. But every time a Zero slid onto one Wildcat's tail, that Wildcat turned toward his partner. Every time the Zeros tried to split a pair, both Wildcats turned inward. The pattern held firm. After 12 minutes, the Zeros pulled away. 2 Wildcats were damaged, but none were lost. The Americans had shot down 3 Zeros, 3 confirmed kills. For the first time in the Pacific, Wildcats walked away from a major fight with a positive kill ratio. Fighter Command couldn't ignore it anymore. On June 15th, Commander John Thach got orders to report to Pearl Harbor. He showed up on June 18th, ready with diagrams, combat footage, pilot statements, kill ratios, survival data, everything the Navy needed to see that the Weave was legit. But while Thach was getting ready to brief Nimitz, Japanese intelligence was getting ready too. They'd studied the new American tactics, they'd broken down the Weave, and they built a counter, a way to collapse the pattern and kill both Wildcats at the same time. On June 21st, Thach presented his briefing. But on June 23rd, Fighting Squadron 3 would meet 18 Zeros over Santa Cruz Island, pilots trained specifically to break the Thach Weave. June 23rd, 1942, 0815 hours, Santa Cruz Island. Fighting Squadron 3 was escorting a convoy when radar spotted incoming contacts, 18 bogies, 12 miles out. Thach looked at his formation, 8 Wildcats, 4 pairs, classic Weave setup. He'd just briefed Nimitz 3 days earlier. Field testing was officially approved. But the Japanese were ready too. The Zeros came in at 16,000 feet, circling instead of diving straight in. They were waiting. Thach watched the Zeros circle up high for a full 90 seconds. Weird. Zeros usually dove straight in, using altitude fast before American fighters could react. But these Zeros weren't rushing. They were setting something up. Then Thach saw it. 6 Zeros peeled left, 6 peeled right, 6 stayed high. 3 groups, 3 attack angles. They'd studied the Weave. They knew 2 Wildcats could cover each other from one direction, but not 3 at once. The attack began at 0817. 6 dove from above, 6 hit from the left, 6 hit from the right. Thach called the Weave, but his pilots froze for a moment. When danger comes from 3 sides, which do you counter first? Lieutenant Bassett chose to turn into the high group, but that exposed his right side to the flank attack. Ensign Beatty tried to swing over to protect him, but doing that broke the Weave with his own wingman. In seconds, all 4 pairs had fallen apart, 8 Wildcats fighting solo, exactly what the Japanese wanted. Thach saw the pattern collapsing. He hit the radio hard. Reform pairs. Find your wingman. Standard Weave. Ignore the other groups. His pilots listened. Bassett swung back toward his wingman, found him, locked in. They began the Weave, even with Zeros coming from every angle. The high group dove first. Bassett turned toward his wingman. The Zeros committed, flew right into the kill zone, took heavy 50 cal fire, and dropped smoking. The right side attackers went after Sheedy's pair next. Same story. The Weave held. Another Zero down. After 8 minutes, the Japanese had lost 5 Zeros. The Americans had lost none. Their big 3-angle tactic had failed. The Zeros climbed away, but Thach understood what mattered most. The Japanese had adapted. They'd studied the Weave.
They'd built counter-tactics. And even though those counter-tactics failed today, the message was clear. Japanese command considered the Weave a real threat, serious enough to train pilots specifically to break it. Thach filed his combat report that evening, describing the 3-direction attack, explaining how the Weave survived it, and recommending immediate fleet-wide adoption. No more testing, no more waiting. The Weave worked against old tactics, it worked against new ones. It worked. Period. The report reached Admiral Nimitz on June 25th. Nimitz forwarded it to Admiral King, Commander-in-Chief of the entire U.S. fleet. King read it. The ratios, the survival numbers, 8 Wildcats versus 18 Zeros, 5 Japanese losses, 0 American losses. On June 29th, Admiral King issued Fleet Order 41-1942. Every fighter squadron in the Pacific was to adopt the Thach Weave immediately. Mandatory training for all pilots, mandatory use in combat.
The matchstick trick was now official doctrine. But big orders take time to spread, time to reach every squadron, time to train. And the Japanese weren't waiting. On July 7th, over Guadalcanal, 32 Zeros would go after 12 Wildcats from 6 squadrons. Some pilots knew the weave, some didn't. And the ones who didn't were about to find out why Thach had been teaching this thing for months. July 7th, 1942, Guadalcanal. 12 Wildcats from 6 squadrons flying CAP over Henderson Field. 4 pilots trained in the Thach Weave. 8 had no idea how it worked. At 11:20 a.m., 32 Zeros arrived from the north. The 4 trained pilots paired instantly and started the weave. The 8 untrained pilots fought the old-school way, one-on-one dogfights. 22 minutes later, 6 Wildcats were gone. All 6 were from the group fighting independently. The 4 pilots using the weave not only survived, they were untouched. They also shot down 7 Zeros. When Admiral Halsey read that report, he didn't hesitate. He ordered every fighter pilot in the South Pacific to learn the Thach Weave within 2 weeks. No exceptions. Training began July 10th. Thach flew to Guadalcanal himself, spending 3 straight weeks teaching the weave to every squadron on the island. Morning briefs, afternoon flight drills, evening debriefs. Matches, diagrams, air demonstrations. Some pilots got it fast, others needed days, but every pilot learned it. By August 1st, 96 Wildcat pilots could fly the weave without a slip. By September 1st, that number hit 214. The tactics spread fast from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from carriers to land bases, from Wildcats to other aircraft. P-38 Lightning squadrons picked it up. P-40 Warhawks adopted it. Even some bomber groups used the crossing pattern defensively. And the results came instantly. Back in June 1942, before the weave became standard, American fighters had a kill-to-loss ratio of 0.44 to 1 against Zeros. For every 10 Wildcats lost, they were downing only 4 Zeros. But by October 1942, after the weave went fleet-wide, the ratio flipped to 2.1 to 1. 2 Zeros shot down for every Wildcat lost. Japanese pilots hated it. Radio intercepts from September recorded their commanders warning them about the American crossing maneuver. Don't tail chase, don't follow an American fighter into his wingman's guns. Break off immediately if they start coordinating. But breaking off meant losing the engagement, letting the Americans protect their bombers, surrendering air superiority. The Zero was still faster and more agile than the Wildcat, but none of that mattered if you couldn't line up a shot. And the weave made lining up shots nearly impossible.
By January 1943, the weave was official doctrine across every U.S. fighter squadron. The Army Air Forces adopted it. The Marine Corps adopted it. Even the British Royal Navy started teaching it on their carriers. The tactic that began with 2 matchsticks on a desk in San Diego had become the backbone of Allied fighter defense. In February 1943, Thach received the Navy Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the development of fighter tactics that have saved numerous American lives and contributed significantly to the success of U.S. naval aviation operations." But medals weren't what mattered to Thach. Numbers mattered. In the 6 months before the weave, the Pacific Fleet lost 137 Wildcats to Zeros. In the 6 months after adoption, they lost just 41. That meant 96 pilots went home alive because 2 lines could cross in midair. In March 1943, Fighter Command reassigned Thach to training duty, pulling him from combat and sending him back to San Diego to teach new pilots. He hated it. He hated being away from the front, but the truth was unavoidable. He saved more lives teaching the trick than flying it. For the next 18 months, Thach trained over 800 naval aviators. Every single one took the weave into combat. Every single one survived fights they should have lost. And every one of them told other pilots about the commander who saved lives with matchsticks. The war ended in August 1945. Thach was 40. He had flown 73 combat missions, scored 6 confirmed kills, earned the Navy Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 3 Air Medals. But none of that mattered more than the number he carried most proudly. Over 2,000 American pilots survived the war because they knew how to weave. After the war, Thach had a choice: stay in the Navy or go home. His wife wanted him back. His children barely knew him. He'd been gone 4 years. But staying meant he could keep teaching, keep saving lives. And for a man who'd saved 2,000 pilots using matchsticks, the choice was obvious. John Thach stayed. He couldn't walk away from the mission. He spent the next 27 years training fighter pilots, refining tactics, saving lives without ever pulling a trigger. He became commander in 1946, captain in 1952, rear admiral in 1960. He commanded carrier groups during the Korean War, never flew combat again, but his pilots did, and every one of them knew the weave. Korean War fighter pilots called it the Thach officially, the only tactic in military history named after a pilot while he was still alive. During Vietnam, the weave evolved again. F-4 Phantom pilots adjusted it for supersonic speeds, calling it the Fluid 4 formation. Same core idea, same crossing motion, just faster. American pilots used it against MiG-17s, the same way Wildcats use it against Zeros. The MiG could outturn the Phantom, just like the Zero outturned the Wildcat, but the weave still worked at 600 miles per hour, exactly how it worked at 300. Thach retired in 1973 as a 4-star admiral with 40 years of service.
He moved back to San Diego and lived a quiet life. He didn't talk about the war, didn't bring up Midway, Guadalcanal, or the thousands of pilots who survived because of his idea. Whenever reporters asked about the weave, he gave the same answer every time. It wasn't brilliance. It was desperation. He just wanted his boys to make it home. And fighter pilots never forgot him. Every year on February 10th, the anniversary of the Weave's first combat test, naval aviators from all over the country would call Thach. They'd thank him, share stories about how the Weave saved their lives or their wingmans. Thach listened to every story and remembered every name. In 1981, the Navy dedicated a building in his honor, Thach Hall at Naval Air Station Pensacola, the heart of fighter pilot training. Every aviator earning their wings walks past a bronze plaque with his face and 3 simple words: innovate, adapt, survive. Thach passed away on April 15, 2001, at the age of 86. Over 300 naval aviators attended his funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. Many were in their 70s or 80s, men who flew Wildcats in 1943, Phantoms in 1967, Hornets in 1991. All of them alive because one commander once sat at a desk and crossed 2 matchsticks. And even today, the Thach Weave is still taught at every fighter pilot school in the United States. Navy, Air Force, Marines. Modern versions have been adapted for stealth fighters and beyond visual range combat, but the core principle never changed. 2 aircraft protecting each other, turning toward one another, crossing paths, surviving as a team. At the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Thach's original matchbook sits preserved in a glass case beside a model F-4F Wildcat. The label reads, "Lieutenant Commander John Thach used these matches to create the tactic that saved more than 2,000 American pilots during World War II. School groups walk past it every day. Most barely notice, but fighter pilots always stop. They look at those matchsticks, and they understand." If the story hit you the same way it hit us, do one thing. Tap that like button. Every like tells YouTube to push this story to more people. And hit subscribe with notifications. We're bringing forgotten stories out of dusty archives every single week. Stories of pilots and commanders who saved lives with matchsticks and courage. Real people. Real heroism. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from Texas, Germany, Australia, Japan? Our community stretches across the globe. You're not just watching, you're keeping these memories alive. Tell us your country. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching and for making sure John Thach's name doesn't fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.